You're listening to Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty. When hurricanes Debby, Helene and Milton menaced Tampa Bay last summer, you may have been glued to your radio for updates. The National Weather Service is a lifeline, not just during hurricanes, but whenever there's severe weather. Hundreds of staff have left the agency in the last 6 months. Could that affect the agency's work? Coming up, you'll hear from meteorologist Brian LaMarre, who led the forecasting office for the greater Tampa Bay region before taking early retirement in April. And what does a summer without Major League Baseball mean for St Petersburg's economy and identity?
We knew who we were as a community when we had the race here, and we gathered as a community. Families came together. We had hot dogs and popcorn together.
Chris Steinelker with the St Pete Chamber of Commerce explains how businesses around Tropicana Field are struggling without the home game crowds. And how do you demolish a bridge? That's ahead on Florida Matters. But first, hear how staffing cuts are affecting the National Weather Service in our community. It's been almost a year since our region survived 3 major storms in a matter of months. As the storms arrived and after floodwaters continued to wreak havoc, we sought guidance from experts at the National Weather Service on the radio, online, anywhere.
Let's start off first with the storm surge risk. Along the west coast of Florida, we have a storm surge warning in effect from Flamingo all the way north through Naples, Fort Myers, Port Charlotte, Sarasota, Tampa Bay region, up to the north, up to almost past Cedar Key, up to Suwannee River. Everywhere in this region is at the risk of life-threatening inundation.
Well, that federal agency lost nearly 600 workers in the past 6 months to layoffs and attrition, and despite plans to hire 100 people to fill the gaps, deadly floods in Texas this month raised questions about these staffing cuts and what it means to people experiencing natural disasters. Well, for some insight, we're joined by Brian LaMarre. Until April, he was the meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service Forecasting Office in Ruskin. That's the hub that serves the greater Tampa Bay region. Brian, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Matt. Definitely a pleasure to be here to talk about this.
Now, you were with the National Weather Service 30 years before taking early retirement in April. Why did you leave?
I think the biggest point for me was I've really enjoyed working for the National Weather Service for NOAA for over 3 decades and really helped implement a lot of change to help with public safety. But since I'm still young enough and the early retirement offer came out, I'm like, okay, well, let me try a second career. And so I launched Inspire Weather, which is a consulting company which allows me to help people understand the complexities of weather.
And you've been pretty busy, right? You were just over in the Middle East doing some work over there.
That's right. Yeah, my first consulting trip brought me over to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia to work with the National Center for Meteorology and working with a team from Colorado known as UCAR, or the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research. So definitely pretty exciting out of the gate.
Now back to the National Weather Service, what was morale like at the agency when you left?
I think it varied. You know, I was in charge of the office that covers Tampa, Florida, and all of the west central and southwest coast of Florida. Morale was very high at the office, and morale was high at many offices across the country. There's over 122 field offices across the country in the National Weather Service that cover every square inch of soil. And there's over 9 national centers, such as the National Hurricane Center, Storm Prediction Center, and so forth. And some offices were very severely short-staffed. And those were the areas where people were really experiencing lower morale and burnout.
But not your office.
Correct.
So you talked to NPR a couple months ago and you explained how the National Weather Service has been kind of whittled down over time. So what are the responsibilities of an office like the Ruskin one?
It's pretty much a 24/7 operation. So each of those National Weather Service field offices are 24 hours, 365 days out of the year. And they're responsible for the day-to-day forecasting, collecting data, releasing weather balloons, looking at numerical weather model data, but also the mission-critical duty of issuing warnings. You know, that's going to be for hurricanes and severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, flash floods, blizzards, wildfires, you name it. That all comes from the local field office, and that's where life is preserved.
When you think about the staff who have left the agency in the last 6 months, does it seem like the National Weather Service has the staff it needs to function effectively?
I think it does in the short term. It's really not sustainable for the National Weather Service to continue any longer than, say, the next several months with such short staffing. When I first started my career over 30 years ago, we were about 5,500 employees across the agency. And over the past year or two, we've been hovering around 4,200 employees. That's what we were at the start of January 1st. And now, because of, as you mentioned, we had probationary people that were terminated. That was not their choice, but we also had around 500 to 600 people that chose to take an early retirement, myself included. That has never before happened in my career with that number of people leaving the agency. And so for the first time ever, the agency is about 3,700 people, and that is very skeletal staff to maintain a 24/7 public safety mission.
And when you have people who've been with the agency, maybe not everyone with 3 decades of experience like yourself, but you have people who've been there a number of years, then you lose a lot of institutional knowledge, right? So what does that mean for something like the National Weather Service?
I think it means it's going to take a lot more time for when the agency is able to start hiring. So we lost a lot of the probationary employees, and that was the new blood. That was the young minds, innovative minds coming out of college wanting to come into the National Weather Service. Those were cut out. Hopefully they can be rehired if they want to come back in and trust the process. But there were so many people, myself included, where you had decades of experience that have chosen to retire and either to do their own thing or just retire and enjoy life. And that's really going to have a significant impact on the experience in the National Weather Service. But I have to tell you, the employees of the National Weather Service are among the most dedicated I've ever worked with in my entire life, both in outside the agency, working with people, and inside. And they're going to make it work, but it just depends on what's the cost of that, because it's not sustainable to operate so many offices at short staffing levels.
Now, after the floods in central Texas over July 4th weekend, some people have been asking whether people had the forecasting information they needed. What's your assessment of that?
I think the National Weather Service did an outstanding job in providing the warning. It's very rare to have a flash flood warning, which triggers what we call the wireless emergency alert, to issue that 3 hours before the flood actually impacts an area. That is almost unheard of.
So you're saying that's a good lead time?
That is a very good lead time for a flash flood warning. And what we talk about, what was called like the last mile of that response, once that warning is issued, it could be a great warning. However, if no one receives it, then the warning is not really effective. And I think that's what occurred in Texas, and it occurs at many locations during high impact weather events where a warning could be given hours in advance, and then people either don't know what to do, people did not receive it, or people received it and simply did not believe it.
There's also the timing, right? Because it came in the middle of the night. People are asleep, so that affects response time. And even when they did get the warning, and from the reporting we've seen and heard, very confusing to try and deal with something of that magnitude in the dark.
It's very true. It's pretty much the recipe for disaster right there, where you have a high impact weather event like a flash flood warning and a flash flood event on a river that is historically flooded many, many times. I issued warnings on that river back in the 90s during another flood event on the Guadalupe River. But this one, again, overnight, they issued the warning, 1:14 a.m. People are sleeping. There was a campground there. Young kids and adults were sleeping, and officials did not get the information in order to evacuate people. So I think there's that missing piece of the puzzle where the National Weather Service can do what their mission is. However, we need to make sure that other people in emergency management and media and the public sector understand how vulnerable they can be in these high impact weather events.
Was staffing an issue, do you think?
I don't think so, because I already heard reports that they had 5 people on shift. That is normal. When we have a hurricane, we have 5 to 6 people on shift, and then we keep everyone on there, and then we rotate off and on 12-hour shifts. So most offices in the National Weather Service right now are short-staffed. However, there are about 8 that are what we call below critical staffing, and they're not able to maintain 24/7 operations unless they bring everyone out on overtime. The San Antonio, Austin office is not one of those offices that are severely short-staffed. So knowing and hearing and reading, and I have friends that work there, they had 5 people on. The fact that they issued that warning 3 hours in advance, that shows that they were on it. It is just highly unfortunate that it occurred overnight and impacted a highly vulnerable area.
We are in hurricane season right now. What's it like being a civilian and experiencing it as a civilian?
It's very strange, because I'm watching the weather every day, because in my new business, I help people understand what's coming their way. But not being part of the National Weather Service, that's been my life since I was 21 years old. So now when a hurricane comes our way, I feel kind of a little uneasy because I'm usually in the office. That's our bunker in Ruskin. We would sleep there to make sure that people have the information they need. And now I'm at my house and watching the storm on radar and hoping that everything works out fine.
The annual hurricane activity forecast, there's a slightly above normal season predicted from the University of Colorado. They're forecasting 16 storms, 8 hurricanes, 3 major hurricanes. How do you think the National Weather Service will prepare for the peak of hurricane season with the staffing that it has?
I think they already have, because much of the preparation occurs before the season actually begins. So again, hurricane season runs from June 1st to November 30th. Much of the work is done during the off season. So if you're trying to prepare and get everything in place during the season, you've already missed half the year to prepare. So the National Hurricane Center, which is part of the National Weather Service, they're based in Miami, Florida, they're going to be on their A game. They're going to be issuing the watches and warnings, and all of the field offices along the coast and also inland offices. We have to remember it's not just a coastal problem anymore. Look at Hurricane Helene last October and in September, where that hit this area, but through September and October, it impacted people in western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee with horrific flooding, and they're still recovering to this day. So again, these storms definitely mean business, but I think the National Weather Service will be ready for the challenge.
All of this change is pretty unsettling for people who depend on the National Weather Service. Is there something that you would like people to take away from this conversation?
I think it's really important for personal responsibility, because we can rely on emergency managers and the media and elected officials, but we have to rely on our own education. We have to know that, okay, I live in Tampa, Florida. I would ask myself, okay, do I live in a flood zone? Yes or no? Do I live in the storm surge zone? Yes or no? Do I live in an evacuation zone? You can see there's different levels here. And I know for myself, I don't live in a flood zone. I don't live in an evacuation zone because I purposely chose to do that, but not everyone can do that. So know your threat. If it's with hurricanes, know where you're going to go before that storm comes our way. If you're living near a river, you want to make sure that you know, how can I get a warning to wake me up in the middle of the night? And that's bringing me to the next point, is a NOAA weather radio. You know, it sounds antiquated. It's been around for decades, and many people do not own a NOAA weather radio. I do, but you want to make sure that you have one, because this is your smoke detector. So when you go to sleep at night, a fire breaks out in your house, God forbid, your smoke alarm will go off, wake you up, and you're going to take an action. If you're resting and you're having a hurricane or a tornado coming your way, that NOAA weather radio will sound an alarm and wake you up. So it's about $25, $30. It's a very important piece to your safety kit.
Well, Brian LaMarre is a meteorologist. He was in charge of the National Weather Service at Tampa Bay Weather Forecasting Office in Ruskin. He worked at the agency for more than 30 years and took early retirement in April. Brian, thank you so much for your insights. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Matt.
You're listening to Florida Matters. Still to come, St Petersburg businesses adapt to summer without the hometown Rays crowds. You're listening to Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty. The Tampa Bay Rays are playing this season across the bay at Steinbrenner Field in Tampa, and businesses near Tropicana Field, the Rays' home stadium in St Petersburg, are struggling. But for others, both in St Pete and Tampa, the move's a good thing. WUSF's Lily Belcher explains.
The Grassroots Kava House is located along Central Avenue in St. Pete, about 2 blocks from the Trop. The owner, Gravy Suits, was happy to see the Rays leave town for the year.
Our customer base isn't really a baseball fan base, so the thing that we notice with them not being here is we're busier.
When the Rays were in St. Pete, he says it actually hurt his business.
The game days, the biggest impact that we would have would be our customers not being able to find parking.
The small 2-lane road is lined with parking spots, but there are only about 3 or 4 in front of each business. But just a quarter mile down the street is a business that depends on Rays fans. From the back patio of Ferg's Bar and Grill, owner Mark Ferguson points out the Hurricane Milton ravaged roofless stadium.
We really miss all the fans coming here 2 hours before the game and then eating and drinking and then going to the game and then coming back and listening to music.
Without the natural draw of a game at the Trop, Fergs is relying on a combination of live music, outdoor games, and TVs showing the Rays.
We do have fans coming here and watching the game, but it's nothing like having a home game.
Ferguson says he's confident the Rays will be back in the Trop for next season. And with rumors of a Rays sale swirling, Ferguson hopes a new owner will keep the team in St. Pete. Just across Central Avenue from Ferg's is Hawker's Asian Street Food. Bartender Shay Taylor says the Ray's absence means fewer customers, and that means her hours have been cut.
I'm struggling. I would say I would work like 40 hours a week. Now I work like maybe 20, 25 on average.
That means she's got less money to spend on groceries and dog food for her 14-year-old pit bull named Lady.
I'm gonna have to get back to work.
Chris Steinecker is the president of the St. Petersburg Area Chamber of Commerce. He says having the Rays in town meant businesses didn't have to close during the slow summer months like they did decades ago.
We've got businesses that are as far down as 30% in our community right now. That's real jobs, that's real shifts, and that's what we're most worried about.
But on the other side of the bay, it's a different story.
You already paid this one.
Mom's Place restaurant is benefiting from the Rays playing about a mile south on Dale Mabry Highway. Diner manager Olivia Tort says the start time of a game determines how busy she'll be.
When it's in the morning, like at 1 p.m., yes, of course, we have a lot of people coming.
She says she's used to the added traffic when the New York Yankees host spring training at Steinbrenner Field. But with the Rays calling the minor league stadium home this season, she says it's a buffer for the annual summer lull Florida businesses like hers feel.
Because I live very close here, and I see when they are arriving at the stadium and they are leaving, and they have a lot of people, a lot of fans. I'm very happy about that.
She says she grew up an Atlanta Braves fan, like her father, when they lived in Mexico. Now, she roots for the Rays. And even 4 miles south of Steinbrenner, a locally owned sports retail store is doing well with the extra crowds. Heads and Tails owner Mary Lou Ortiz says having the Rays close means she's getting more business.
It's really great to see our locals come in too, really excited with their little ones to go catch the game. So we definitely do benefit when they're playing home and they're playing well.
If all repairs go as scheduled, the Rays will be back in the Trop in time for next season's home opener. But their lease there is up in 2028. Where they will play after that is still up in the air. Lily Belcher, WUSF 89.7 News.
Chris Steinecker is the president of the St. Petersburg Area Chamber of Commerce and joins us now. Thanks so much for being here, Chris.
Absolutely. What a beautiful day in St. Pete today.
You talked to WUSF's Lily Belcher, and you told her that some businesses in St. Petersburg are seeing a 30% drop in their business because the Trop is out of commission right now. So if you're managing a bar, can you sustain that?
You have to become pretty innovative pretty quickly, and that's what we're really noticing. I give the example of Ferg's Bar, which obviously lives and dies on the Rays or the Trop site stuff. Well, now you're seeing him offer everything from pickleball to major concerts now, every kind of activity, axe throwing. He's learned how to maybe through the summer try to at least generate some other actions or activity centers for the downtown. But I do believe it's a bigger issue, and I just spoke to some of our folks in the Edge District, which is where the Trop site is, and in the last 4 months, we haven't opened any new businesses there.
And is that unusual?
Oh my God, yes. I normally do a ribbon cutting a week.
Wow.
And that's been on an average over the last 10 years in St. Pete. The small business thrive in our community. The main streets of Central Avenue and First Avenue North and South are great places for businesses to grow. And that Edge District, that central meeting point of where we all began, is hurting and it is being impacted. And while some people still continue to thrive, those that really believed in the baseball community and invested in it because we said it was going to be here, they are feeling it. Many will innovate and survive. I know them. They're the greatest people on earth. You want to be in St. Pete to know these people. But there will be changes. And what we want to make sure is we want to make sure that the changes are good for our community. We believe in the small business. We believe in the local owned proprietor. And you start to get concerned when you don't have the activity for them to be able to be very successful at the pricing right now in St. Pete. So it's a big deal for us this summer, and we are feeling it. It is a big impact.
Let me just ask about that ribbon cutting a week. So, I mean, this may be a bit of a back of the beer mat figure, but if you're talking about 50 new businesses a year, are those like businesses coming and going? Like, are some closing and you're opening new businesses, or is this just sustained growth over the last decade or so?
I would say 80% of it is sustained growth. So I've been doing ribbon cuttings at the chamber for 15 years now. I average about 60 a year. In that time frame, I would say like It's not surprising that I've been in the same place 2 times. Maybe one time I've been at 3 times. So that means that company has turned over into something different, but a rare. We have stickability, sustainability. The things that we're concerned about are the pricing of our real estate, the affordability of the land around for the employees, and the activity centers that we can create to keep bringing people to their doors.
And the Trop would be one of those activity centers.
Absolutely. It's proven itself out. I guarantee you much of the growth that has come from it was in 1998 when people came down to St. Pete for the very first time and went to those couple bars on Central and then walked over to that first game and they were like, holy cow, we had no idea there was so many storefronts. We had no idea there's so many cool, funky old buildings, so easily walkable. That's lit the fire for us. And then we began to invest in that same kind of annual march to the Trop through our stores and what we do. So I do believe we set our culture up the last 27 years on this kind of activity center. And that's why I'm saying it's not lightly that we say that we can just let this go.
We talked to you on Florida Matters back in April, and you were warning then about the potential impact of the Trop being out of commission. Is it as bad as you thought?
I think it's worse.
Huh.
I think it's worse. And I think the financial and economic impact is just a little bit worse than I thought, but the mental and community impacts of who we are and how we feel about ourselves, I think has created an uncertainty and a concern of all of our folks in our community. Who are we going to be and what are we going to be after all this? And we knew who we were as a community when we had the race here, and we gathered as a community. Families came together. We had hot dogs and popcorn together. We became a community, and those days have not been around. Like, we did take a bus of folks to the Tampa field to feel that again, but we were doing that on a regular basis. We were hosting things at that Trop site. And so building a community, it's like going to Thanksgiving dinner and then all of a sudden that the place that your family always has Thanksgiving dinner, oh no, they left or your dad died or whatever. And like, then the next Thanksgiving is so different. And I feel like that's what this summer is for us. It's like, wow, this is different.
I mean, community is sometimes a bit intangible, right? But having something like a real flagship business like the Rays, that's been quite important to the identity of St. Petersburg and its economy over the last 20 or so years, right? So, I mean, is this sort of a litmus test of what St. Pete could be without the Rays anchoring that?
Yeah, like what I really want to make sure I communicate is I know St. Pete is more than baseball. I really know that. So please, if anyone's listening, going, oh, we're going to be okay. We are going to be great. It's going to take a long time, though. This took 27 years to be this great, guys. So do we become great next year? No, we don't, because nothing's changed. And I have a parking lot next to a lot of businesses wanting people around.
Yeah.
This took 27 years to create a magic that everybody wants to be down here right now. So I concern myself that, yes, we have the arts and we're the city of the arts. Yes, we have small businesses. Yes, we've got more Fortune 500 businesses on this side of the bridge than they do in Tampa. So we have an economy here. And I want to make sure I encourage that we do have a major economy here, but it's about who we feel like we are. And the Rays have helped us identify that. And the Rays have contributed that by showing up, and they're the number one business in my community that gives the most to charities. So all the community organizations that are feeding people, that are helping students learn, that are walking students to classes, those are at risk right now too. So you start to erode the fabric of your community when the biggest funder of those kind of social programs walks out. And so I really do believe it's going to take a longer time than anybody imagines to try to get back to the energy we have today.
What kind of help can the Chamber of Commerce offer businesses or employees who are hurting from the Rays move across to Tampa for the summer? Because we did hear from one person who works at a restaurant near Tropicana Field and has seen her hours cut in half. So that's obviously a big impact for one person.
Yeah, we're going to have to start talking about how do those kind of employees, can our businesses start to share employees in any way? Kind of like the COVID method of who's available and can that server get more hours over at the Mandarin Hyde than they can over at Ferg's or whatever? Can we work together to do that? So we help the city run something called the St. Pete Greenhouse. And that's what we're starting to discuss now is we have got to, if this does become the case. Now, the best part is, and I want to make sure everybody hears this, like we are preparing for baseball in 2026.
Sure.
And that is going to be the litmus test is what the difference is then when you have the people on the streets now. So now you and I know what it feels like not to have baseball. We're going to feel it back. And I really believe then is the moment where we go, okay, what can we do? So we as a chamber are gearing up for 2026. We want to make it the best opening day ever. We want to make it the best season ever. So welcome our boys back into the summer, welcome them back into our community, and let's have some fun and let's bring back the people to our city.
In the last 30 seconds or so, Chris, what about just regular folks? If they're sort of seeing businesses struggling, what would your advice be to people who want to help bring that community feeling back in the absence of baseball for the summer?
Please come over to St. Pete. We just had a big shopping gala yesterday, our 50-some year of waking up at 6:43 in our pajamas and shopping at all of our small businesses. And it was a wonderful success. So I do believe at least our local community understands that St. Pete's a pretty cool, funky place to be anyway, and they probably are hurting a little bit now. So all I would ask is like, hey, come visit our businesses, come buy a beer, hot dog, come see one of our shows in our community, come to our museums, because we need the help right now. We, after this hurricane and now after this, we take for granted sometimes those things that are awesome. We just think they're going to continue to go. And as you know, momentum's everything, and in an economy, it's everything. So I do believe we've got to ensure that we keep the pedal down and try to keep beating the drum that St. Pete is the best place to ever be.
Chris Steinocker, President of the St. Petersburg Area Chamber of Commerce, thank you so much.
That was fun. Thank you.
If you've driven across the new Howard Frankland Bridge lately, you may be wondering what's happening with the old bridge. WUSF's Sky LeBron went out to the bridge to get some answers. He met up with David Alonso with the Florida Department of Transportation.
So when do we start to see stuff blow up? That's what's going to happen, right? In this demo?
No. A lot of people think it's going to blow up. I was actually in an Uber recently after a trip, and the Uber driver thought it was going to explode. I just let him tell his story until I, finally shared what was really going to happen. I think he was a little bit bummed by it. I would love to see something like that, but it's not the best for the environment. The contractor has submitted the plans to methodically cut this up and remove it. So it's not going to be a very flashy, fast operation. It's going to be months and months into early next year of removing this piece by piece.
What happens to all these old pieces of bridge?
So they're going to make their way onto barges, and they're going to go down the Tampa Bay, just south of the Gandy Bridge on the Hillsborough side, where they unload everything and start to process it. These things are loaded onto the barges in just massive sizes, basically as big of a size as a crane can pick up, but those sizes are not usable for selling. So it's going to get processed into those sizes that people want to buy. So this is 3 miles worth of bridge material. I'm sure it's going to have various applications.
David Alonso with the Florida Department of Transportation talking to WUSF's Sky LeBron. You can hear the rest of that interview and see photos of the Howard Frankland Bridge project on WUSF.org. That's our show for this week. Grayson Doctor is Florida Matters executive producer. Our producer is Amelie Horace. Steve Newborn mixed and produced this episode. Subscribe to Florida Matters wherever you get your podcasts. And we're on WUSF's YouTube channel. I'm Matthew Petty. Thanks for listening.